Welcome creators to the Designer Tech channel, where I, Warwick, help you with your creative or design projects by adding some technology to help bring them to life. This is the second part of a video series around using C# code to control the Unity user interface to manipulate layout of the user interface and potentially to deal with things like TextMesh Pro. In this particular video, we're going to look at how I use anchors to design a sort of flexible user interface to lay it out, and then how to use the Rescaler component, which is provided in a project, to basically change the way the layout will work for a UI component, a UI object that is, to pin it maybe to the top left, the top right, bottom left, bottom right of its parent, and you can control a few different things with that, and also you can restore its original position. So that could be useful in a number of different ways if you wanted to make, if you wanted to make the user interface say dynamic in some circumstances, you wanted to introduce different panels or just make the user interface a bit more interactive or interesting. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the resizer component in this particular video, go through how the component works, have a look at some of the utility classes and how that the code actually works. Like I said, there's a Github project that all of this is provided in, and you'll find a link to that Github project in the description below. Check out the first video if you wanted a bit of background on TextMesh Pro, and there'll be a following video that does even more with animation, again controlled by code. So the Rescaler component is a bit different, so let's see what it does. The idea of the Rescaler is to actually, it's dealing with this object here. In fact, I think it's on that object. Yes, it is. And if we look for the public methods that are on this object, we have a top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. We can dump its current RectTransform values and we can set it back to normal. So what's happening here is within its parent, it can be pushed into the top left, top right, bottom right corners. It also has some variables here like the scaling factor and the padding. So padding's like a margin from the corner, and that's really what it does. So the idea is to pin it and to scale it into the corner. Now the best way to do that is, because we want to have that offset from the corner, it actually needs to change from, right now it's pinned to the right hand side, so for instance if I say top right corner, then it's going to switch to being this kind of an anchor, and it should change the pivot as well, right? So the pivot value should change to being 1 1, so it'll be the top right corner here, and then the offsets can be set to the margin. That's basically what that needs to do for the top right. So the pin and scale method is an internal private method here, and we can see that uses the RectTransform utility class. It uses, this is let me get that RectTransform util here. This is an extension method, which is why it looks like you can call it on the RectTransform itself. But because it's an extension method, it's sort of externally adding a method onto the RectTransform. That's a C# feature. Okay, so basically, really, this is a static method. And it's passing the RectTransform as the first variable or parameter, and then you have things like these UI position settings, which is another. It's a struct, but it's again just to hold the values to capture what the RectTransform main settings are. So that's So it fixes the size and the position. You'll see it sets the things like pivot, position, it sets up the anchors, right? Because you need to change the anchor, you need to change the pivot, you need to change the scale and the position. So that's what this does. So let's have a look at that in action. Okay, now we can turn off the rescaler just to, the resizer there, and just to not have that distraction going on. So if I say top right, no, not there, that's the game, not the game view. Down here, top right, it's changed it to be, I have to go back on the image to see the settings. So the scale factor is 0.2, which means instead of being 100%, this is 20% of the original size. This is a 1920 by 1080 image. So if I make it 0.5, it'll be pretty big. If I click on one of these other buttons, you can see now it's using that scale. If I make it 1, it'll be pretty huge. So top left, right? So now it's too big. So let's change this back to, if we change it to 0.1, okay, it's pretty tiny. But we can see what's happening is this, it's, in fact, if we look up here, we can see the position is 10 pixels in because of the margin or the padding that's set there. We can see the width and height is the 1920 by 1080, but because of the scaling, which is 0.1, which comes from the scale factor, it's tiny, so it's actually 192 pixels by 108 pixels because it's 10% of the width and height. We can also see the pivot changes, so that's top left, which means an x of 0, where are we, x of 0 and a y of 1, because 0 is here, the left edge, a pivot of 1 would be the right edge, right here, because it's the pivot of this object, and a y pivot of 0 is the bottom, and a y pivot of 1 is the top. So if I say, let's say top right, now it should be 1, 1 pivot. So pivot 1, 1. We can see also the anchors are essentially 1, 1 in every direction. So that means it should be anchored, and we can see here it is anchored at the top right of the parent. And of course it's minus 10, minus 10 to be 10 in on either side. Okay, if we do bottom right, and again I'm clicking on the wrong thing, bottom right here, again it's the same sort of thing. The pivot will be, make sure I've got the right thing selected, image. The pivot will be a maximum x, but a 0 of the y, so the pivot is 1 and 0. Again, it'll be the same deal for the anchors, so it's the maximum anchor, but the minimum height anchor, and we can see that here. See all the anchors are concentrated in the parent's bottom right corner. And what else? We've got the scale of 0.1, which was set here. So for instance, if I change this to being 50, and then hit these buttons, top left, you can see it's 50 in, and sure enough it's 50 in up here in the offset there. And we could do that, oops, top right, and that's consistently doing all that. Okay, you may see also that this text is changing. Other things to say, also has, let's see, also has the rescaler on it. It's got different settings. It's actually got a scale up factor. It's being made bigger than the original size. So that's why sometimes when I click these buttons, it's moving a couple of things. Because I've wired up the buttons to call the top left, top right. So these, where are we? Rescaler. So these methods like top left, top right are actually wired up in the buttons. So top right, we can see here it's calling on the image rescaler class, the top right method, and the same for the other messages, which is why top right will move this up there as well as the image. So I hope that all made sense and gives you an idea of how you can take different objects, whether it's text or an image, and you can pin it to a corner, and you can vary that to any of the corners. So that's, now why would that be useful? That might be useful if you wanted to have components that you needed to move around just to change the layout, just dynamically, maybe to, whether it's to get the interest or just to change the layout for different sizes of display. You could be a bunch of reasons why you might want to do that. Okay, so let's have a little bit more of a look at the code. So we have a few utility things here. So the UI position setting, like I said, is basically there to hold the RectTransform values, and that allows, if we go back here, it actually works with the RectTransform utility a fair bit. If I search for, let me get the name of, right, we can see that we have things like get UI position and set UI position, which can work in terms of the UI position settings object. So they make it very easy to capture and to restore the settings of a RectTransform. Other things in here in this RectTransform utility enable kind of explicit settings, right? Instead of using the UI position settings struct, you can also just pass in explicit settings. So this RectTransform utility class gives you a few quick ways to consistently change the layout of your objects. Okay, the UI debug is a relatively simple thing just to capture the setting, the current values of the RectTransform, and I actually use this in some of the research around the offsets versus the position, like anchor position versus offsets, just to fully debug some of the things when I had some strange behaviors, because like I said, these properties are they change given the context of things. Okay, so just to explain, the parts that are used here are RectTransform, UI debug, and the UI position settings in terms of the utility classes. Okay, so one thing we actually should do is look at the Rescaler a little bit more, only because the Rescaler is actually quite reusable. It should be a nice, well, depending on your use case, what you want to do, but you could use it to make a reasonably cool thing. Let's make a quick scene to demonstrate this idea, so you can see what I'm rabbiting on about. So let's create a new scene, test Rescaler. So the Rescaler, when I say Rescaler, it's not really, doesn't really tell you enough. Hang on. What? Yeah, that's better. A panel. Okay, so the Rescaler is not a great name in some ways because it's doing more than that. It's giving you these functions that let you reposition objects, top left, top right, and so forth. So it's more than just scaling. Yes, it lets you scale those things, but for instance, let's make a quick kind of layout that you can collapse and expand just using the Rescaler. That's something I want to show you. So let me quickly assemble this together so you can see how we go about it. So let me have I know what I want to do. In fact, yes. First of all, let's make this a background panel. So I've got a quick setup. Actually, I wanted to have some buttons. So give me a sec. Let me move this image down a bit. -40. Actually, let's scale it down just a touch more. Okie dokie. It's better, and that just gives me a little bit of room to stick some buttons up top. Just to trigger. Okay, terrific. So we're going to pin that to the top. Get away. We're going to bring that to -20. Make it visible, so 80 tall would be nice. Change the pivot because it's easy to think just the edge gap, so make that a 1, which means now I can make that -20. And let me try -5. Okay. Now, before I get too carried away, let's duplicate this because I want 2 of them. I'm going to move one to be, say, -100, so it'll be to the left, and the other one +100, so that's to the right. So they're one's to the left and one's to the right of the center pivot point. And now to sort of say what they do. So one will be like a very simple collapse restore feature is what I'm looking for here. Collapse, restore. Okay, so here let's say collapse and hit enter. Let's auto size it so that it just fits in there. Now it needs a margin. Margin. The other cool thing you can do with where are you? Oh no. Auto size options, min, max, line, wrapping, alignment. Where are you? Extra settings. Is it in extra settings? Ah, here it is. Margins, right? So the problem is the collapse is hitting the. If we zoom in, boom. So it's hitting kind of the edges there, and that's a bit awful. So let's make that say 5 from the left and right. Is that's a bit better? 10 would be even better, right? So 10 pixels margin from either side of the button just makes it look a bit more awesome. So let's make this say normal. Make it auto resize, and we'll probably have to see now it's hard up against the edges. That looks like crap. So again, same deal, and we're good to go. Okay, so now we have a UI, but it won't do anything just yet. So we need to set up the image and the words to have the rescaler. So if we go to Designer Tech, Rescaler, right, now we can that means the image could be moved to the top left, the top right, and so forth. So what we might do is when we collapse, let's make it move to the top left with a certain offset, and we'll make the text move to the bottom left, and it'll look, essentially when you're collapsing, you're putting all that content to one side. Or even actually, just to make it interesting, let's put the image to the top left and we'll put the text to the bottom right. Okay, so let's do that. Righto, so scale factor down to 20%. That's fine, we can try that. And a padding of 10 might not be enough. Let's try padding of 20. We'll go to our collapse button. So in the button we have add a handler, drag the image into the object we're going to manipulate, choose the function on the rescaler, go for top left, and if we hit play, this should work. Bang, bang, bang. Yep, so now if I hit collapse, that jumps into the top left, right? Now, we don't have, normal's not set up, but that's an easy thing to do too. But let's set up this text words to do the same sort of thing. So we scroll down here, add a component, Designer Tech, Rescaler again. This time 10 might be enough, 0.2, yeah, we'll see how that goes. It might be fine. So go back to the collapse button again, this, we add another handler. This time we drag the words in here, and we say Rescaler bottom right, starts with B, Warwick. There it is. So that means that the image will jump up to the top left, the text will jump down to the bottom right, and that's what it will do. Actually now, 20% size of this is going to be probably a bit small. Let's try 40%. All right, let's hit play and see how it looks. Okay, so hit collapse, and they jump in their sort of distinctive corners. Now you might say, well, why on earth would I want to do that? Well, it might be that you might set up an animation using Mechanim or something like that, or a timeline where the UI sort of changes, and you want to sort of bring in some sort of center image, to draw attention from the user, and so you might start with some sort of main title thing, and then you want to move into the next part of the UI, so they jump to the side and get out of the way, and then some new sort of UI panel could appear in the center. You could do lots of things. All right, so now let's wire up the normal button. Normal. Here we called restore. So we go add. We have to drag the object. So one. So image. Go rescaler. Should be reset to normal. We do the same thing again. Words. I can drag it from here. Bang. Boom. Function rescaler and reset to normal. Reset to normal. That's basically it. That's all I want to do. So now if we play, if I collapse, bang, they're in their corners, hit normal, bang, they're exactly where they were. And it restores the layout scenario in terms of, is it anchor based or is it position based, and it does all that. So it's actually pretty neat. The RectTransform powers this thing, and it means that this is actually a nice, neat little component, this rescaler. Like I said, probably I should change the name to Rescaler, and I don't know, it's going to be a long name, right? Rescale and put in corners or something. But anyway, that's what it does. It lets you push things into corners and set the size. Okay, so there we are. Now we should have a look at the animatable layout. That's the next thing.